Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fermilab's Family Open House. My name is Kathy Clarkin, and I'll be moderating this event with Wally Lavernier as he teaches us about winter adaptations at Fermilab and gives us a virtual tour of Fermilab's ecology. Wally is Fermilab's Senior Natural Resource Specialist and an ecologist. His specialties include prairie and wetland restoration, invasive species management, prescribed burn management, and macroinvertebrate surveys. I work in the Office of Education and Public Engagement at Fermilab. We'll have your cameras and audio turned off, but we'll be watching chat, so if you have any questions, feel free to type them there. I will present the questions to Wally after each section of his presentation, and then Wally will stick around to address remaining questions at the end. Now let's explore Fermilab's ecology and learn about winter adaptations. Wally?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And so, as Kathy said, we're going to be talking about winter adaptations at Fermilab. I think a lot of people think that, and we think about things in summer, and plants and animals have a pretty hard time in the winter and have some pretty interesting adaptations. So we're not really going to be talking about anything other than just the adaptations that they have. So during this, we're going to be talking about different strategies and what animals incorporate them, and sometimes plants as well. On the left is a list of animals that we'll be talking about, and we're going to stop along the way just to make sure we're covering questions as we go through them. So how does life cope with winter anyways? We're not going to talk about fall preparation very much, but there's a lot of preparation that goes on in fall. You know, things gain a layer of fat, they eat a lot, they molt their feathers or start changing towards a winter coat, but we're not going to talk about those adaptations as much other than, you know, when they're already in those states. Some animals avoid winter. They do that through a variety of ways, and we'll cover each one of these topics. And then other animals stay pretty active in winter, and they may shelter during bad weather. And then at the end of winter, we have onward to spring, and some animals try and take advantage of this in different ways, and we'll just touch on a few spring adaptations as well that are towards the end of winter. So I have a few videos to start with of what Fermilab looks like. Most of these videos are probably 2 to 3 weeks old at this point. So this is the Prairies out by Kirk Road by the Pine Street entrance. We had a prescribed burn during the fall. So it's not a lot of vegetation in there. And unfortunately, because of the snow cover, I wasn't able to get in and have a video of a prairie, of an unburned prairie. This is our sparrow hedge area, which is shrubland habitat. Again, there's quite a bit of snow. In there, I was in there about 2 weeks ago, and there's about 15 or 16 inches of snow. But a lot of tracks, a lot of animal activity. And this is one of the lakes. And quite frequently, when I walk in there, there'll be coyotes on the edges that are using this area. Here are some animal tracks that I was following in Big Woods, which is the largest woodland on the site, and these were mainly coyote tracks. And then just one quick video. Sorry about that. And then just one quick video of what Big Woods looks like right now. So in all these videos, you don't see many things moving around. It looks pretty quiet, looks pretty still. But there's a lot of things going on under the ground, in the trees. But first we're gonna talk about those animals that avoid winter. One of the things that we think of most is migration. And we generally think of that as birds that are seasonal migration, and that's migratory patterns that are influenced by the change of season. And we're generally in the Mississippi flyway And when we think of migration, we think about birds leaving and heading down to Central and South America, the Caribbean for winter. Birds also leave the Arctic and actually come to us during the winter, and they're still avoiding, a harsher winter, but they can overwinter by us. Bats also migrate. They hibernate. They'll head to hibernaculums like caves or mines where they can go indoors, or not indoors, but inside, or far enough south to where they can still forage during the winter. And the interesting part about bats is sometimes they actually migrate north to get to a cave. That seems counterintuitive, but they're just looking for a place to be able to hibernate. So I brought up two different species as an example for migration. So everybody knows our ruby-throated hummingbird. This picture on the left is their summer range, and this is through 10 years of June to July through eBird. And then on the left, this is December to February. So you see that there's a few spots in the northern portion. So all these kind of the deeper purple you get are more sightings that are submitted by observers, and anybody can submit data to eBird. So you see, everything during the summer. There's a lot of reports, kind of all through eastern United States. And then when you get down into Central America, there's some in Florida that overwinter. An interesting thing on spring migration is some of these birds actually change their migration routes. So hummingbirds weigh 1/10 of an ounce, so it's a little bit more than a dime. And during the spring, they'll migrate across the Gulf of Mexico. They want to be able to set up breeding territories to get the best breeding territory, so they have the most likely have successful young. And during the fall, when there's no rush, they can change their migration route and come down the coast of Texas, so they don't actually have to fly over the Gulf of Mexico. That's a incredibly dangerous flight. It's several hundred miles, and there's no land. And think about being 1/10 of an ounce trying to cross several hundred miles in one go. The next I have is an American tree sparrow. So this is one of our winter sparrows. And they summer and they nest up in in Alaska and northern Canada. And then when they migrate for winter, they migrate down towards us. So you can see there's some, these darker colors are where people are seeing them more. So right where we're at is kind of where they like to hang out during winter. So they're just avoiding that cold, harsh Arctic winter. And yeah, so they just come down by us, and they have some winter adaptations that help them survive the winters by us. Another type of migration that occurs, I think is one of probably the most impressive ones, is generational migration. So this is migration that's conducted over several generations of a family, basically. And so not one individual makes a complete journey, so it's all genetic. And monarch butterflies are the best example of this. And of course, everybody, cares about monarch butterflies. But so flying south in the fall, they fly south in one generation, and then those individuals overwinter in Mexico. They shiver to maintain body temperature as a group, and then they migrate north in several generations. So that first generation may start, and then they lay eggs, have caterpillars. Those caterpillars turn into adults, and then continue that migration back north. And this happens seasonally. They come from a tropical group of butterflies, so they can't actually tolerate our winters. So they've evolved to migrate pretty far north. It's pretty amazing. Eruptive migration is another kind of migration, and we kind of think about this as a seasonal, but it tends to be more based on food shortages. We're in an interruption year for crossbills and evening grosbeaks and redpolls. Those are all finches, and that tends to be they eat pine cones, and if you run out of pine cone seeds, then they have to move elsewhere to find that. So that's an eruptive migration. Snowy owls can also be an example of this. Evening crossbills have not been seen at Fermilab, but the other three have. Snowy owls was a long time ago, but it still applies. Kathy, are there any questions on migration?
Yes, there are. We have a couple here. Um, is there evidence that climate change has affected species' winter survival strategies, or has it only affected the timing of seasonal effects that are experienced through enduring strategies?
So I'd say I didn't actually look into this, but I do know I moved back to the rethroated hummingbird for a specific reason. They've My understanding is they've changed their migration patterns. So now they're migrating on the southern tip of Florida a lot more than they did historically. Historically, they would tend to go farther south. So they are changing ranges, and they are changing their habits. I know another one that came up in the other talk, the bird talk on Wednesday was Dennis Kania mentioned that Carolina wrens have moved northward, but they also overwinter here. Historically, they aren't found very often here. So, so yeah, the climate change is causing things to adjust their patterns. Some things for the better, some things for the worse.
Yeah, I have a related question for that. So, for a bird, for example, do they know when it's time to migrate based on the temperature or based on the length of day? So, are they impacted by climate change because of
I
the
think
temperature or
most
not?
I think most of it is daylight length, because how could you? I guess one question would be how could you be in if you're in South America, what kind of cue do you have to move northward? It would have to be some type of a daylight, but that's not something I've looked into that awful much.
Okay. There's another question that I think I'm going to hold on to until you talk a little more about adaptations, but that's all we
Okay.
have for now.
Okay. So hibernation is another way to avoid winter. And this is there's a bunch of different kinds of hibernation, but generally speaking, it's being dormant during the entire winter. Not all cues are understood. Some wait till bad weather, and some may be a daylight length to where they know it's time to head indoors and find shelter for the winter. Um, Illinois DNR lists 11 mammal species in Illinois that hibernate. Woodchucks, big brown bats, 13-line ground squirrels, northern bats, and little brown bats have all been observed at Fermilab. So those are the ones that hibernate on site. Or I guess the bats big brown bats can hibernate in buildings, but the other two would go towards a hibernaculum. But the year in parentheses is the last time they were seen on site. So this is a picture of a 13-line ground squirrel. This was actually taken at Fermilab. And then this is a picture of a bat from Illinois Natural History Survey. So another type of hibernation, or another group that goes through hibernation, is frogs. And it's really cool. I didn't realize that different types of frogs and toads all have different strategies. You think of them all being related, but water frogs stay underwater and they need to be in good oxygen levels. So we'll talk about turtles a little bit later, but they basically absorb oxygen through their skin, but they stay more active than turtles. So they need to be in areas where there's flowing water. So these are northern leopard frogs and bullfrogs are good examples. American toads, they're good at digging, so they burrow below the frost line to hibernate. They can't freeze. If they freeze, they don't make it through the winter, so they need to make sure that they get deep enough below the frost line. There's other frogs that don't dig well, and they overwinter in leaf litter. Tree frogs, spring peepers, wood frogs are example of these. And they have this, they have glycol that they can create, and it's basically like antifreeze. It's to prevent them from completely freezing. So this little green tree frog picture here, this was actually why I decided to have a presentation on winter adaptations. My wife and I were hiking at Hickory Knolls in St. Charles, and he was out on the path, just half frozen. And so then this picture on the right, we actually took it to Willowbrook Wildlife Center so that they could hibernate it. And our little frog weighed 1.8 grams, so not very heavy. But yeah, it's pretty crazy to see a tree frog in the middle of winter, and then it was completely healthy. It just an animal may have disturbed it. Other animals that hibernate, bumblebees hibernate, and it's really a lot of bumblebees are at risk of habitat loss, and populations aren't doing that well. So our native bumblebees basically start as a queen in the spring, and they build their colony. And at the end of the year, um, the queen is the only one that survives to the next year. The rest of the colony dies. So the queen has to find a good spot to hibernate, safe place, and then she carries on, that species to the next year. So we need to do everything we can to protect bumblebees. And then again, the next year, then she starts that colony all over again. And then some butterflies actually overwinter as adults in leaves. I don't know if you can see, this is a eastern comma right here. And they basically just overwinter as adults in leaves. And I've never seen one do that, but it's crazy to me. Snakes go through something similar as hibernation because they are cold-blooded. They go through this process called brumation, and their body temperature is regulated by the environment, whereas in hibernation, body temperature is regulated, by the individual, by the mammal. So snakes can stay slightly awake, slightly active. I actually saw one in February 2020 on a warm day. So you may see animals that are brumating. You may see them on a warm streak in the middle of winter. It is possible. And they also can use hibernaculums, so they are resting during the winter in mass. And this is a green snake that was found on site several years ago. So turtles also brumate. They find their location in water to overwinter. It needs to be in unfrozen water. So in northern Illinois, it has to be several feet deep. They spend several months in the water under ice. So how do they breathe? They like frogs breathe through surface linings. They can absorb oxygen, and they're much more. They move a lot less during the winter, so they can use a lot lower rates, and they don't have many of those surfaces. So where does this exchange occur? This exchange can occur over their shell, through their hard surfaces. So in all their greatness, they are able to breathe through the linings around their butt and their intestines. So before they go in and hibernate, they actually have to have all of their food move out of their system so that they can take advantage of this. It sounds crazy, but it's a pretty incredible adaptation that I would never imagine in a million years. But this is a snapping turtle that's actually under the ice. And they can be active during the winter as well too. They can move around some. So we'll go through one more, I think, before we go for another round of questions. So diapause is a period of suspended development, and this happens a lot in insects, snails, mites, and spiders. And you can suspend at various stages. So this picture on the right, this is a Cecropia moth cocoon that was found in a stewarded woodland at Center Woods. And it was actually, if you look real closely, unfortunately it was predated by woodpeckers. You can see these lines in here, but still it was there. So this is, this is staying at this life stage until growing conditions become more optimal. And then also dragonflies and damselflies are another good one. They stay at this stage until things become more optimal for them to be flying around as adults. Kathy, are there any more questions?
Yeah, there's a question. Is Fermilab hibernating right now because of the pandemic? So maybe you could talk about how it's a little bit different now versus before the pandemic, of the type of work that you're doing and how that impacts the living things there.
Okay, so yeah, so I suppose you would say that Fermilab is hibernating, and so currently it's just a few people that are on site working. We're trying to do most of the main work, but like our Fermilab natural areas and stuff like that, they're all in hibernation currently. Um, but as far as life is concerned, it's actually things are pretty active with less people on site. Um, you see a lot more movement. You see a lot more things moving around. So wildlife adapts pretty well to less people being around. I know that's not exactly answering it, but
We have another series of Fermilab specific questions.
Mhm.
Um, so how does the presence of the lab and its energy footprint change the winter adaptations of any of the animals?
So I would say as far as like waterfowl is concerned, there's a lot more open water at Fermilab, so you get movements of birds into the site more frequently, and maybe earlier migrants are finding Fermilab because there's a water source there. I think that's probably the biggest change. Other than that, at some level, the lab being there has allowed for the natural areas to occur. So things are allowed their natural processes a lot more at the lab than they are in the general suburbs.
Um, the same questioner, Neil, goes on to ask, how did the decommissioning of the Tevatron change any of that?
I don't know, quite honestly. So the Tevatron, those ponds do freeze over in the winter now, but in the main injector, those ponds generally are open. So some tend to be a little more frozen now, and those other ones in the main injector now are stay open. Um, Much smaller. There's not a lot of open water right now, but there's a lot of waterfall on them in the open areas.
Okay, and for those of you who are less familiar with Fermilab, Tevatron was our large collider that was decommissioned in 2011, I believe. It was 4 miles around and had cooling ponds all around it, which some have filled in since then. Um, all right, we have another question from Laura. We have carp in one of the ponds by us that make it through the winter in the pond, even when it's most of the way frozen. How do they do that?
So fish is actually one that I didn't really talk about, but one carp can live off of really low oxygen levels. So that's part of how they can. But most of our native fish, what they can do is they just need to have deep enough water to where that water doesn't freeze over. And as long as there's not an extended snow period, even if there's ice on it, there's enough light that gets through that the algae and things in the water can still produce enough oxygen for the fish to live. So carp are usually one of the last things that have issues, but things like largemouth bass, bluegill, things like that require a lot higher oxygen levels. So in a period where you have several weeks to say a month of snow cover on ice, there is a potential of seeing fish kills in the spring, just because of there's no ability for the plants to create oxygen.
Um, Alexi says that he saw a fish fully frozen in ice and still survived. How did that happen?
That I don't know. That might be a very specific adaptation. Um, and one thing I should note, like on this presentation, is you probably could have a presentation on a specific species in here that's a half an hour or 40 minutes on winter adaptations. So really, I'm scratching the surface. I think most fish, if they freeze, they would die. So I would have to look into what species that was.
Yeah, I think he said it's bluegills that he saw.
Yeah, I don't know about
Yeah.
how they do that.
Okay, that's all the questions for now.
Okay.
But keep them coming because we'll have a discussion at the end too. So
Um, so I wanted to make sure that we're going to touch on plants briefly. That's a major portion of my job. And they also have to cope with winter in different ways. So plants themselves, they enter what people call endodormancy, and it's internal regulation to prevent leaving plant dormancy too early. And basically what they have to do is the plant's able to register a number of hours above freezing to break this dormancy. And I found this from Michigan State is where this information is from. And they said that the number throughout Michigan is generally 700 to 1,300 hours in Michigan to break that dormancy state. And then the plant moves to ecodormancy, and it awaits suitable environmental conditions to begin annual growth. And things like when crocuses germinate, like in January when you hit a warm spell, they don't have the endodormancy requirement. They're just on ecodormancy. So they get the right environmental conditions and they grow. Our native species, nothing really grows in January, even if you have a week of warm weather. So they all kind of fall into this period where they have to have so many hours register above freezing, and then when you hit the suitable conditions, they can begin to grow. There would be a pretty large consequences if things didn't happen this way. And then also seeds also have dormancy. So when the plant flowers and then creates its seed, many seeds need to go through a process called stratification in order to germinate. And so basically, they can have like a cold, whether it's 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. It depends on the species. Sometimes it's in wet conditions, sometimes it's in dry conditions. But basically, you have to have kind of this recipe to allow the seed to be able to germinate. And a great way to do this naturally, if you're recreating an ecosystem, is if you seed in the fall and winter on snow, they go through this process naturally. I don't think you can really it's just easier to throw it out and let nature do its thing. Each seed figures out where it's supposed to be and what kind of dormancy requirements it has in order to germinate. But that's why if you seed in spring, some species like grasses typically don't have these requirements, so they may germinate right away, whereas wildflowers tend to have to overwinter. So we like to think about animal adaptations, but plants have adaptations as well. Because again, if you had a seed that they had the right conditions in January and it didn't have these requirements, it might grow, and then you might get weather like you have now, and yeah, it would die right away. I think Kathy, I saw this screen flash, so we're leaving plants. So if you want to ask, you can.
Okay, is the mechanism by which the delay of endodormancy is counted or measured in the plant understood?
I did not see where it was understood. I just saw that that's what they're saying the process is, but I never found the mechanisms, how it was measured.
Interesting.
It certainly could be. For some of these things, researching, I wasn't able to research everything I would have liked to.
I have one going back to the dormancy of animals. How do predators adapt to their prey going into dormancy or migrating?
So how do predators adapt? So I think it would depend on the predator. Like owls, I didn't mention, but I don't mention in this presentation, but they have amazing hearing. So they can hear rodents running under snow, under a foot of snow. And so they're able to still find it. I think their normal senses, like coyotes, smell, foxes' sense of smell and hearing, all these things help to be able to catch their prey.
So even if something were hibernating, they would
I
find it. And
I think they definitely can. I'll talk about opossums in a second. Well, like opossums move their shelters every few days so that they don't get eaten. They don't stay in one spot for a very long time, and that's a response to predators. So, there's I think probably some of your smarter predators, probably like coyotes, kind of are able to find where likely areas that things are hibernating or taking shelter, and they're able to take advantage of that.
All right, that's it for now.
Okay. So torpor is, you could call it like hibernation light. Animals lower their body temperature, slow their heart rate, lower respiration, lower their metabolic rate. And this can be like 95% lower than normal. But it's not quite hibernation. Hibernation is that extended period. No matter what kind of weather conditions you get, they're not going to become active. Whereas, think about things that you see on nice days in the winter: raccoons, Virginia possum, many rodents. Some bats go through this, not necessarily right here, but they do farther south. So if we get a warm spell, you'll see opossums running around. You'll see raccoons out and about. It's just basically sleeping to avoid those worst weather conditions. Birds also go through this. Hummingbirds, doves, whippoorwills, and chickadees are examples of it. It can be really dangerous for birds because when they're in torpor, basically, so they have to kind of like jumpstart in the morning, so they shiver to warm their body up, and during this time period, they have really slowed reflexes, so they're really prone to predation at this time. It's a pretty amazing process, and since we have the picture of the opossum on the bottom of the page, I'll just mention that these guys, they're not very well adapted to winter. I feel really bad for them every year. You can see this one, doesn't have fur on its toes, and it doesn't have fur on its ears or its tail, so it gets frostbit. They don't have a long life expectancy. They do their best, and they're really important animals to have around. So if there's anything you can do to help them, they eat a lot of ticks for one. They're just a great animal to have around, and they provide a lot of ecological benefit to people that maybe people don't realize. So any little nudge you can give them in the right direction is I'm sure greatly appreciated by them. But yeah, they have a rough time. So shelter. So these are now, we're moving into more active animals, and even if you're active, you need a place to hide during the worst days of the year. So on the right here, we have a squirrel nest. So people think of that. When you see a clump of leaves in the trees, it's probably squirrels that are making those. On the left here, we just have some holes in the trees. A lot of birds need those. Squirrels use those. So I was kind of joking that this one kind of looks like a condo. There's 3 homes right next to each other. But beaver dens, muskrat dens, these are all examples of shelters that animals are using in order to avoid the worst weather, or evenings to avoid those low temperatures. So adaptations for body. Spiders go through a transition to include glycol in their bloodstream. It was actually decided that I was going to present on this, and I was working in Big Woods South, one of the woodlands on site, and this is an active spider in January. It was a fairly nice day, and then this is a little spider, and this is my finger next to it to show size. I mean, it's a tiny little thing. But these were out and about running around in January. So they have basically antifreeze that's allowing them to be active and not freeze. So least weasels haven't been seen on site since 1983. So it's been quite some time. But this is a great example. They have a summer coat, and then they have their winter coat. They're actually have a white winter coat in our area. I've seen one in McHenry County with its winter coat. So it definitely does happen in this area. And long-tailed weasels can also do this. And the last sighting of a long-tailed weasel was in 2018. So that's a fairly recent lab record. We all know that mammals get thick, dense coat of fur during the winter to better insulate them. Everything really looks pretty fuzzy and pretty large compared to what they normally do. So these were 2 deer seen 2 weeks ago in Big Woods. there was actually 4 or 5 of them that were there, but yeah, they looked pretty fluffy, pretty healthy individuals. Birds, they fluff up in cold weather, and basically that allows air to get in, and that air can then insulate them. And some also can have dense insulating feathers. Waterfowl would have this, and basically, keep them dry and warm. They may pull their feet inside, tuck one foot up so that it's not outside. Some birds have this really incredible adaptation. How is this great blue heron? This was taken in January. How is its legs staying warm and not freezing in this water? Some birds have their veins and blood vessels in their legs can run adjacent to each other. So here's a picture from Cornell that kind of shows that. So basically, as your artery, as it's going away, it cools down your blood. It gets really cold at the base, and then to prevent issues in your body, as it gets closer to your body, as it gets closer to the core of your body, it warms back up to something that your body can accept. So it's an incredibly amazing adaptation that birds have. Waterfowl do this. Birds that you see in the water are going to be really birds that have this adaptation. And then we'll go through one more, and then Kathy, I'll see if there's any more questions. Larger animals are more efficient at retaining body heat. Body shape also helps with this. If you think about mammals, a lot of times are kind of round, not long and elongate, like I mentioned that the weasels and things of that sort, they have a lot of body surface area that's exposed to the environment, and that's not very beneficial. So things they can do is they can curl up, like this coyote seen below. It really reduces the amount of skin that's open to the environment. They also huddle together. They can become more social during the winter time, and this is basically to be able to stay warmer. Kathy, if you want to ask something, go ahead.
Yeah, there are a couple questions here kind of related to stewardship. Laura asks, are there things possums look for to shelter in that we could have out for them in the winter?
So there is, I've seen the website, that basically if you put out like a Tupperware and you could put some straw in it, and put a hole in it, there's actually, if you search for a possum winter shelter, something will come up. I've seen them before, and I was actually going to look it up again before the presentation and forgot. But yeah, you can put something like that out in your backyard, and they may use it.
Great. And then Nina asks, when is the best time of year to get a tree trim so it doesn't disturb squirrels' nests?
So it doesn't disturb squirrels' nest. Well, for the tree health, you'd want to do it not during the spring when the tree is actively growing. For the squirrels' health, I think I'd probably be more worried about the tree health than the squirrel health. So you'd want to do it on a dry day, because what can happen is if you cut a tree on a moist day, basically it can get a fungal infection. But fall and winter, when things are dormant, is the best time in order to trim a tree. And I think I'd pay more attention to that to avoid long-term issues than a squirrel. Squirrels a lot of times will have multiple places that they can move to. So yeah, I think that'd be the least of my worries.
And I had a question for an animal like, say, a coyote. Is there some temperature at which they wouldn't be able to adapt? They wouldn't be able to survive, or some amount of time at a low temperature?
I don't know. I don't know that answer. But I do know, like, our past winters, I mean, obviously they have to be in good physical shape to make it through winters, especially a period like we're having now, or like those really cold temperatures that we had last winter. But if it's a healthy adult, I mean, if they have a good winter coat and they're able to find good shelter during those cold days, they can burn, and there's snow on the ground. I think snow on the ground is really going to help because it insulates around them. So if they can find a decent shelter spot, they can tolerate some pretty low temperatures. At least what we have to offer, they should be fine as long as it's a healthy adult.
Mhm. Okay, thanks. That's it for now.
Yeah. So some more behavioral adaptations. Or I guess now we're moving into behavioral adaptations. So those least weasels, I said they had a really bad body shape because they're really elongate. They actually have to eat like 40 to 60% of their body weight every day in order to maintain their body temperature. Um, yeah, it's basically all rodents this time of the year. So they really help with the rodent population when there's a population present. Then they're pretty voracious predators. Um, Rodents use the snow layer just above the ground level. Like if you see the picture below is voles probably running around. These are insulated, in snow, it keeps it close to freezing. So they can have a pretty good winter of running around on the surface and eating roots and grass and things like that to make it through the winter. A lot of us think about robins as being, migrators. And really what happened, one of the things that happens is there might be some individuals that migrate away and some that migrate here. But they basically change all their habits in general. They flock up and then they change their habit. They change their eating from eating insects and then they move to eating berries. And so that's why we don't see them in the normal locations and eating the normal foods. They move into kind of more forested areas. So they're a little bit harder to spot. They're not like in your yard or on the ground. So it's a pretty large adaptation. There's other animals that do this as well, but I think American robins are probably the best example in our area. A lot of animals, this goes back to fall, but it happens in winter too. When they find food, a lot of mammals and birds cache that food in order. If you have an abundance, store it for later. I mean, everybody's sees the pictures of squirrels going and digging holes through their yard, caching things and then finding them later when they need it. And birds do this too. Especially if you watch nuthatches off your feeder, it'll pull a seed away, go fly away, and put it under some bark or something, and then go get another seed, do the same thing. And they're just basically hoarding their food so that they have it when they need it or during worse environmental conditions. So kind of moving on, like I said, there's so many adaptations. We could stay here for hours and days probably talking about them, but kind of moving out of the late winter and into early spring. There are some plants that get an early start in spring. This is a picture of skunk cabbage, and it's our earliest flowering plant, and it can be that flower can be 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the surrounding area, and it attracts the pollinators for this are carrion flies. You see that maroon, the flower kind of has a stinky smell. So it basically is it trying to attract these flies that eat off of your like dead flesh in the spring, and then that's the pollinators. So a great pollinating way, I know, but it's a pretty unique adaptation. They get a really early start on the flowering process. Owls and bald eagles can be incubating on eggs late winter, and this period is starting right now, and that allows for juveniles to hatch earlier. Those things that may take a long time to develop. Mammals do the same thing early spring, and that way you make sure that they're ready by the next time winter comes around, that they've grown and have enough life experience to be able to make it. And then, so that was kind of my just touch on early spring. Another thing on early spring, when I was talking about migration, that is really important. So talking about how things shift and change, especially with climate change. I've already seen meadowlarks on site this year, and these are species that, they may be moving through farther north, but they also, they're trying to get a competitive edge on the nesting season on great territories. So animals will always try and push the limit to what they can do. And this is, the healthier the individual is, it definitely gives them an advantage down the road. So if they don't have to migrate as far, or they can migrate back a couple days early, they can get a better territory. And these things are always, they're like I said, they're trying to push the boundaries on what they can and can't do, and those healthy individuals are much more likely to be able to do that. So here's just a few additional pictures from this year at Fermilab. These are actually 2021, not 2020. But this is that hoarfrost that we had a couple weeks back, and this is actually the eagle from this picture. It's just a different view, the same tree. And then this is the main ring. So one last note, there's a lot of things people can do in their own yard. You can leave the leaves. Like you saw, there's things that overwinter there. You don't have to rake everything, or rake things into your, if you have native plants, you can rake leaves into that area so that then animals can leave their eggs or cocoons or whatever in those areas. Let dormant vegetation be. If you have gardens, you don't have to clip it in the fall. You can wait until the new vegetation grows out, so that there might be a insect that's overwintering in a stem or something like that. You can put out heated water, but make sure that it's clean. It's also a way that disease can be transferred, so you want to make sure you keep that water clean. You can leave out a pile of sticks or logs for something to shelter in during bad weather. Like we mentioned, you can create a shelter for opossums, and I don't have that link available, but I wish I'd looked it up. And birdhouses can be used during winter for shelters as well. So that's what I have. I don't know if there's any additional questions, or we
Yeah,
can.
that was great, Wally. Thanks. We do have some more questions.
Yep.
Okay, Neil says, the lab seems to do some things to help plants overwinter. Is there anything being done specifically to help animals?
So we pretty much let things take the natural process. I mean, by creating a healthy ecosystem, or trying to create a healthy ecosystem, we are helping the animals out. That's probably the largest area, but we don't specifically put out shelters or anything like that for the animals. But there's a lot of dead and down trees. There's a lot of brush piles and things like that are around that animals can find shelters.
Okay, the next question is from D. Do animals remember where they cache food, or do they just happen to find the cache later?
That would depend on species. I know some are really good about finding food that they've cached, and I don't know what the number is offhand, but I think it's squirrels that are really bad at finding their cached food. So yeah, it just depends on the species. Especially things that cache food, like crows and blue jays, things like that. The corvids, not the covids, the corvids species, they have a really great memory and are really intelligent birds. I think they generally remember where they cache things.
Okay, next question is from Greg. Do winter survival odds vary significantly across species? And on average, what percentage of animals survive a typical winter here?
So yes, they vary greatly based on species is what I can say. Some of those, especially some of those larger animals like deer and things like that, unless it's a really bad winter, most of those would make it through the winter. I would say that your smaller animals that have a harder time regulating body temperature, those are going to have a harder time. I don't know percentages. Insects would have a harder time because like we saw that cecropia moth, it was just there and invisible to a woodpecker just to go find it and predate it. So there, it does depend on the species. I would assume you're going to the high 90s to probably under 50% pretty easily. Depends on your species.
Okay, I just want to remind people we have a few more minutes, so you can type in some more questions. We had a couple of people give some information that might be of interest to the audience. Laura said the link for the possum information about creating possum shelters is www.possumpower.org. And then Liz says the Fermilab stewarded woodland have brush piles that naturally create shelters for animals to overwinter. Okay, then we have a question from Neil. Why does the lab engage in active stewardship of plants and not animals? I'm sure there must be some rationale.
So you probably can look at it a little bit differently than that. So do we manage for animals through if anybody saw Dennis Kania's presentation on the bird monitoring at Fermilab, we're actually there's an area inside called the Eola grassland, and we have a restoration plan for that, and that's directly to support grassland breeding birds. That's the if it was a prairie that I was trying to restore, the first thing I would do is destroy the cool season grasses and then plant native grasses in there. But birds like that cool season grass structure, so we're leaving it like that for the animals. I would say that probably the easiest way to manage for animal populations is through a healthy ecosystem, and those are the easier changes to make. We have tried to introduce Baltimore checker spots on site. We have tried to introduce barn owls historically on site. So we do that, and we have an ecological land management committee that I'm the chair of, and so we have it right now. It's every 3 years that we update the plan, and we do have goals that are geared towards animals, sustainability, plant communities. We try and address everything that we can, but a lot of times, some of that will be through reintroductions. Some of that would be through managing plant communities in a certain way to benefit animals. Hope that answers it.
I have a question based on your last slide about what we can do to help animals in the winter.
Yeah.
A couple questions. What's your thoughts on raking your leaves and bird feeders?
So we rake our leaves. I think if you want to stop them from trying to blow in the neighbors' yards, we try and isolate them, but we try and do it early enough that animals are able to take advantage of that, and we just kind of leave them in our native plant beds because those are messy in some people's eyes anyways. So I think there's kind of a median ground, and I think that would be pretty acceptable. And then as far as bird feeders are fine. I would just say keep them clean. If you notice birds that aren't healthy, like finches can get an eye disease, and that's contagious. And if you see birds that have that, you should definitely make sure that you address that issue. And it might be that you have to take your feeders down for a while. But yeah, I don't personally see an issue with bird feeders. It's something that connects people with nature, so I think the overall benefit is positive.
Mm-hmm. Good. I just want to let everyone know if you have any more questions, we got a couple more minutes. It looks like we'll give that a minute, and while we're waiting to see if anyone has any more questions, I have another question for you. Why do some geese migrate and others don't?
So I don't know so basically there's migratory and non-migratory geese, and what we think of as nuisance geese, those are non-migratory. I don't know the mechanics behind why some migrate and some don't, but there definitely are. There's actually, man, I want to say that there's over a dozen subspecies of Canada geese. So each of them will have a little bit different life history.
All right. Well, I don't see any more questions, so thanks again, Wally. That was a great look into to Fermilab in winter. And thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'm sure many of you are eager to come see Fermilab's ecology for yourself when we are once again open to the public. We hope to see you then. In the meantime, be sure to sign up for Wally's presentation tomorrow at 2 p.m. on the past and present of Fermilab's natural areas restoration. You can also find many more online opportunities to learn about the science of Fermilab and the programs and educational resources we offer at fnal.gov. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Wally.
Thank you, everybody.